Welcome back. I'm David Knight, and we're talking to Jon Rappoport. Jon is a frequent host at InfoWars, and he is somebody who's been covering the, how do we put this, the vaccine, medical, big pharma shenanigans on a wide variety of issues for a very long time, as well as many technological issues affecting our freedom, our liberty. And he has a site, No More Fake News, and he did that a long time ago, before fake news became one of the biggest terms of last year. NoMoreFakeNews.com is Jon's site. You can also find him on Twitter at Jon Rappoport. And I want to talk to Jon about the flu epidemic, primarily because we've now, Jon, had the CDC, who is involved in some of these continuity of operations drills that they were doing to make sure that the government is protected, no matter what the government causes to happen. But anyway, they switched from nuclear disaster talk to a flu outbreak. Excuse me. And this is happening even after the false alarm missile attack in Hawaii. Now they're focusing on the flu, and we got mainstream media like the LA Times using war talk about the flu. California hospitals face a, quote, war zone. They're setting up tents. It's a crisis. They're doing triage and so forth and everything. Yeah, out in the streets, talking about how many people are dying and how the number of people have dying from this have gone up. Talking about first 2, then 7, then 10, then 15 in a week dying. But there's also, if we look at this, 7 of the 8 people who died in 2 weeks in Santa Barbara had just gotten their flu shots. So what does that tell us, Jon?
That tells you that somebody who's an independent researcher with a good lab should be investigating the flu vaccine to find out exactly what's in it.
That's right.
You know,
that's right. Yeah. What is it?
There's the obvious implication of that, because we do know that some flu vaccines still have mercury in them, which is one of the most potent toxins on Earth. But of course, we're not supposed to think about that, nor are we supposed to think about the announcement by, quote, medical experts that this year's flu vaccine is only 10% effective. And that's
their figure. That's their optimistic figure.
Yeah, that's right. That's their best guess, right, on how good this vaccine really is. But to me, the big underlying story, as I've been reporting on for years, is documented evidence that overwhelmingly, when doctors send respiratory samples from diagnosed and likely flu patients to labs, they come back without any sign of any flu virus whatsoever. Mm-hmm. In other words, the whole label flu covers a wide variety of causes, potential causes. And simply having a cough, a fever, headache, muscle weakness, or whatever is not necessarily a sign at all that somebody is, being infected by a flu virus. And people have to understand that. And of course, with all the media hysteria about this, you're going to get people who, at the slightest sign of any of these symptoms, is going to rush to their doctor and be diagnosed. The doctor's going to look at them and say, well, you have the flu. So there's all this underlying insanity that's going on, and all of it is really being hyped to further the flu vaccine. In fact, you'll see stories in the press now about research that's underway to develop a so-called universal flu vaccine, which would supposedly protect people from any flu virus in any season. And of course, this current, quote, outbreak is great marketing for that kind of vaccine.
And, of course, that's always been the common sense objection to this. Even if you don't really understand the issues of vaccines and, what did they put in there to irritate your immune system, things like mercury and so forth, the adjuvants that they put in there. Even if you don't get into that level of detail with it. Many people look at it and say, well, every year they're talking about a different strain. How do they know which strain is going to be there this year? And so it's kind of like a shot in the dark to say that you're going to predict which strain is going to be coming out, because the strains mutate and the vaccines also mutate as well. So they don't know even what they're trying to come after. So to get around that common sense objection, they can just label it universal.
Right. In fact, when they said, okay, this year's flu vaccine is only 10% effective, researchers claim to have discovered the real reason why this is so, and that's because the flu vaccine is produced using chicken eggs. And the researchers said, now we've discovered that when you put a flu virus into chicken eggs, and that's the one that's going into the vaccine, that virus will mutate, and therefore, by the time somebody gets the flu shot, it's not going to be the same virus that's present in the environment during that year. And this is supposedly the explanation. The only problem with that is that chicken eggs have been used to make vaccines for 70 years. And so that would be an admission that all along the flu vaccine and other vaccines are hopelessly inadequate. But of course, no mainstream reporter wants to venture into that territory, so they just leave that part out.
Yeah, they haven't just started mutating. But I find it interesting.
Yeah.
After 70 years, the chicken eggs are starting to change, right?
Yeah. Right.
The thing I find interesting about this is the CDC's involvement. And the fact that they would do this after the false alarm in Hawaii, and they would use the rhetoric to say, well, nuclear detonation is unlikely, but the real critical thing, the real thing you should be afraid of is the flu. So they're going to put this out there. Talk a little bit about the connection of the CDC to the vaccine industry itself, and the fact that they would use this to scare people to get them to get their vaccinations.
Well, the mandate of the CDC is to promote vaccines as heavily as possible in every possible way, because they purchase every year $3 or $4 billion worth of vaccines. They are a customer. At the same biggest customer. At the same time, they are tasked with doing research, okay, on the safety and efficacy of vaccines. So that's, you can't get any more conflict of interest than that.
Yeah, okay, they're kind of a middleman. They're promoting it. Yeah, they're promoting it while they're looking at whether or not it's supposedly whether or not it's safe.
Yeah, I mean, what are they going to do? They're going to say, well, gee, we just bought $600 million worth of vaccines and we discovered that they're all unsafe and they could kill you. No, that's not going to happen. It doesn't matter. They're going to rig the science to fit their plan and their program, which has to do with forcing people to get vaccinated.
Yeah, exactly. We got to take a break. It kind of reminds me of the Monty Python sketch. The guy says, well, I got all this string. He goes, that's a problem. We can sell it. Yeah, but they're cut into like 3-inch sections. No problem. Individual stringettes. And so that's what they look at this and it's like, hey, this stuff is bad for business. No problem. We bought billions of dollars worth of it. We're going to sell it, market it one way or the other. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Jon Rappoport. Welcome back. I'm David Knight, and we're talking to Jon Rappoport of NoMoreFakeNews.com, and also one of the frequent hosts here at InfoWars on our fourth hour. We're talking about the flu panic. They want to tell us that it's a pandemic, and yet, as I point out, of 8 people who died in, I think it was Santa Barbara, but it was in California, 7 of the 8 had just had a flu shot, and they were over 65. And for the most part, they don't keep any statistics on people over 65 who die from the flu. Isn't that interesting? But young people are also getting the flu, and it isn't just about the risk involved in vaccines that we've been talking to Jon Rappoport about. It's also some of the treatment that they give people who have come down with flu. There's a story out of Allen, Texas, about a young girl who was sick and had nearly committed suicide because she took Tamiflu. Here's that report.
Hospitals are filled with flu patients right now, many of them taking Tamiflu. But one young patient's reaction to that drug has her family saying never again. Like so many others, it was a flu diagnosis that came with a choice, whether or not to take Tamiflu. But an Allen family who wants to remain anonymous says the side effects on their 6-year-old were stunning. Hallucinations, running away from school, and an attempt, they believe, to hurt herself.
The second-story window was opened, which was in her bedroom, and she was used her desk to climb up onto it, and then she was about to jump out the window when my wife came up and grabbed her.
They took her to the hospital, where a doctor informed them that nervous system problems, including psychosis, can be a very rare side effect of Tamiflu. Emergency room physician Dr. Glenn Hardesty.
It can happen. Less than 1% is what's listed in the data sheet. So I've been in practice 20 years, and I haven't seen that particular complication.
It is written in the fine print, and Dr. Hardesty says there's always a chance of a side effect with any drug. The little girl's parents say they wish they had known.
I don't think the 16 hours of symptom relief from the flu is worth the possible side effects that we went through.
His message for parents: do your homework before taking Tamiflu.
Know that side effects are there for a reason. They're written down for a reason. I guess they can happen. And we got the short end of the stick.
All right, John. So, yeah, that's a common story that we see over and over again, where we see it every time we look at a commercial on cable news. They're talking about sometimes a very minor condition, and then they go through and list all these horrendous, serious, life-altering or ending consequences that can be there that are in the fine print. And as the parent said, hey, if we'd known, we would not have done that, and we will never do that again. But you can say that about a lot of pharmaceutical drugs.
You bet. All you have to do is watch television, as you say, and you'll see, yeah, you know, your arms could fall off and you could die, but it's a wonderful drug, and keep taking it. And also,
well, they show pictures of people playing in fields with puppies.
Right, yeah. Blowing bubbles, it's all wonderful. We know that in the case of many of these drugs, and it was alluded to in that report, that the studies, for example, on Tamiflu, even the official studies would say, well, it can help you a little bit to alleviate the symptoms. Mm-hmm. This is not some, even by conventional standards, this is not some, miraculous cure by any means that would justify risking somebody's sanity and their life to take the drug. I mean, come on. And this is the case
16 hours.
Yeah, he
16 hours of relief.
16 hours of relief, right? Maybe 16
That's
hours
case.
of relief. So I was hoping for relief. Instead, I wanted to kill myself. I mean, it just doesn't, compute. So, yeah, they get you on both ends with vaccine and then with the drug. Oh, you didn't have the vaccine? Okay, so you should be taking the drug now that you have the flu. Of course, we don't know that you have the flu. We just done some sort of eyeball diagnosis, and these simpler symptoms that many people have could have come from a variety of causes, but we're not going to talk about that. We're only going to say flu, that's it. Take your drugs, take your vaccines. This is the mantra. This is what the press keeps on trumpeting. And I think
people need to develop skepticism about this, because we're always being sold these things, and we think, even if it's something that's going to be minor, it's like, okay, I'll get 16 hours of relief from it. We don't think about the side effects. We don't even question whether or not it's going to be effective. And we've seen throughout the history of this, I've got an article here on my desk going in India. They're looking at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation because of what they did 9 years ago to young girls there with the HPV vaccine and Gardasil. And of course, they tried to do that here in Texas with Rick Perry. And they do these experiments on people promising miraculous cures and no side effects, and people just gullibly go along with this. Yeah, I mean, you really do need to develop a strong sense of skepticism about these pharmaceutical drugs. That's why we're talking about the flu, the Tamiflu, and even things like HPV vaccines. But just general vaccines and pharmaceuticals in general, develop some skepticism.
As I frequently say on InfoWars and in articles that I write, I cite a July 26, 2000 study in the Journal of the American Medical Association, a review conservative estimate that FDA-approved pharmaceutical drugs kill 106,000 people in the U.S. every year, like clockwork, and also millions of serious adverse effects from these drugs. So you bet people have to be very skeptical, because they're not going to get that skepticism by and large from doctors or hospitals or anywhere unless they do their own research and make up their own minds about this. Pharmaceutical companies are in the business of sussing out new markets, selling new drugs, developing new drugs, making billions of dollars, and convincing doctors to prescribe these drugs. We've seen this with the opioid epidemic, for label uses that have never been indicated or approved of, just to say, sure, you can prescribe this long-term, there are no problems, when, of course, long-term prescription of opioids leads to addiction and death.
Yeah.
So it's just incredible, the crimes that are being committed under our noses.
And to shut down things that are safe and effective. I mean, the first thing that anybody would do, you look at ways to improve your immune system, right? You can do things very simple. Make sure you get plenty of rest. Make sure you're drinking clean water, and taking vitamin C supplements or whatever, eating good whole food, just various things like that we know aren't going to harm us. They're not expensive. And they're safe and effective things to do. So you would think that people would do that. But we've got the government, and including that CDC, even though the private organization, and you've got mainstream media panicking people about the flu stuff, just as they do other conditions, and then selling them a miracle cure, which, as you're pointing out, it's killing a vast number of people with pharmaceuticals. But the opioid epidemic is prime example. I was just talking about yesterday how the Obama administration under Medicare heavily subsidized this and put limits on how much states could charge under Medicaid for opioids, getting it down to like $1 per pill. And they were selling 250 pills that you would buy for $250 over a period of time. You can sell that for $4,000 on the street. So they're encouraging this opioid epidemic. At the same time, they're criminalizing things that are far safer, more effective, like medical marijuana. It's just amazing.
Absolutely. In fact, in 2016, Obama signed a bill that was approved virtually unanimously by both houses of Congress, the effect of which was to hamstring the DEA, Drug Enforcement, to go into a major pharmaceutical company and say, we know you're trafficking in opioids. We know which shipments you're sending out, gigantic numbers of pills, to little pharmacies that are drug traffickers. Now the DEA can't do anything about that.
They work hand in hand, just like they do with the CDC. Thank you so much for joining us. Jon Rappoport, again, you can find him on Twitter at Jon Rappoport. That's Rappoport. And also on No More Fake News. And at InfoWars, you'll find him as a host and a writer.